Hello everybody, welcome to chapter 11. Our topic this time is Sikhism. And Sikhism, I suspect, is one of the religions that many of you have not encountered before this course or do not know a great deal about, at any rate. And that's because it is a relatively small religion and a relatively new religion. But even that said, it's the fifth largest religion in the world after the big ones, Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism and Buddhism. So it is a significant religion in the world. It is a young religion, as I mentioned. It's only about 500 years old. It's the youngest of the religions we've talked about now. And by the way, just as a note, in terms of the course, this is the last large chapter-wide religion that we're going to talk about. In chapters 12 and 13, we'll deal with a variety of religions in chapter 12, and we'll deal with some general topics in chapter 13. So this is the last of our world religions in the traditional sense of the word. As I said, Sikhism comes around in the 16th century, thereabouts, and it's associated with the region of Punjab. Punjab, which is in northern India and Pakistan today. The issue is that during this time period, that is to say the 16th century, Punjab was in a kind of a tight spot geopolitically. It was along the line of conflict between the Hindu south and the Muslim north. And this was a often violent conflict, and certainly always a tense conflict. And during this time period, an individual who is the founder of this religion came to prominence in his community. His name was Guru Nanak. And he brought this prophecy, this message from God to the people that there is no Muslim and there is no Hindu. That's the classical phrasing of his message to the people. There is no Muslim and there is no Hindu. Now, he's not denying the existence of these religions. What he's saying is that there is no difference between worshiping God the way Hindus do and worshiping God the way Muslims do. That they're ultimately the same thing, just in different forms. So that's already a fairly interesting sort of proposition, because you guys have studied Hinduism and you've studied Islam, and you know that they're not the same. They have some very distinct differences between them. And so we should already be interested in taking a look at how Guru Nanak and how Sikhism in general reconciles those differences. And here's the idea. There is one God recognized in Sikhism. That's obviously something that's very familiar from Islam. Less familiar from Hinduism, but because there are many gods in Hinduism. But if you'll recall, when we studied Hinduism, I made a point of saying that for a lot of Hindus, this idea of many gods is just symbolic, that they all point to this greater, ultimate, eternal, infinite thing, and they are all emanations of that thing, or they are all stand-ins for the worship of that thing that we can't name or imagine. And so the idea that all of these are representative of one infinite thing, that's also pretty similar to the way monotheisms view God. They view God usually as much more approachable, but nonetheless, it's not that big a stretch to try to take Hinduism and turn it into a monotheistic sort of creation. So we have one God. We also have the idea of reincarnation. Now, again, this is a reversal. This is not something we find in Islam, but it is something we find in Hinduism. Karma, of course, is going to have to be part of Sikhism. If they believe in reincarnation, they must have some sort of idea of karma, that our actions have consequences in future lives. So that's going to certainly be present. And there's also something interesting here that we haven't talked about too much with other religions, and that is the idea of pacifism. We've talked about this a bit with Jainism and early Christianity. The idea of peacefulness, of nonviolence, of not fighting other people, which makes a whole lot of sense if you are bringing a new message to the people in an area of heavy political conflict. Your message had better be a non-threatening one to the powers that be. Because if you bring a militant message or a reactionary, revolutionary sort of message, it's pretty likely you're going to get crushed before you get a chance to spread that message. And we see this with Christianity too, right? We already talked about this. Christianity is a very peaceful message until it's powerful enough to not have to rely on that. And that's when you start seeing wars and so forth happening. Same kind of thing here. It starts out as a very peaceful religion. And I keep saying starts out, that there is going to be some alteration to that in the future here. So those things are all things we're familiar with, and they're all parts of Sikhism. But I also want to point out a couple little tweaks. For one, there is pacifism, but there's not this idea of ahimsa. Remember, ahimsa we talked about in Jainism was that radical nonviolence. Don't walk on bugs, don't eat meat, all those sorts of things. Sikhism doesn't observe that. In fact, Sikhism, unlike Hinduism and most forms of Buddhism, is not a vegetarian tradition, or there's no requirement that you be vegetarian. In fact, there are some parts of the tradition that say eating meat is a good thing, a virtuous thing to do. So it is nonviolent towards humans, but it does accept that there are times to kill, and there are appropriate ways for that to happen in terms of the world around us. Also, Sikhism speaks out from its earliest times. Guru Nanak speaks out against this idea of ritualism, of putting a lot of your importance and weight of your religion in the rituals. This is pretty interesting because the two religions that we're talking about here being compared, Hinduism and Islam, they both have really, really strong commitments to the importance of ritual. Hinduism has very elaborate ritual structures and all sorts of things involved with their ritual, which hopefully you remember from your readings. But also, of course, Islam has these central ritual elements to it. This idea of daily prayer, this idea of pilgrimage in your lifetime, this idea of ritual fasting, and so forth. And these are central. These are the pillars of Islam. And so to say no ritualism in Sikhism, that seems odd. That seems like it would off-put people who were coming to Sikhism from Islam and people who were coming to it from Hinduism. But the trick here is that it's a really smart move if you're trying to downplay the differences between two religions. So if you want to take people from any two religions in the world and say, look at how much you have in common, you want to take the focus away from their rituals, because rituals are different. They're idiosyncratic. They're unique to the people that create them. The beliefs that underlie those rituals are often very similar. So focus on belief, not on ritual, and you'll get a lot more connection between groups. And that's, of course, what Guru Nanak is trying to do, to show these people how much similarity there is between Hinduism and Islam, and to create a unity, a peace between the two. Guru Nanak lives his life, spreads this message, gets some followers, and by the way, that's where the Sikh in Sikhism comes from. A Sikh is just a student or a disciple, and so it just means the disciples of Guru Nanak initially, and then that's the name we still use today, the Sikhs. He lives his life, he dies. When he dies, there's a sort of a miraculous story about his death that paints this picture of unity too. When he dies, his followers are divided. Should we bury his body the way Muslims do, or should we cremate his body the way Hindus do? And so Guru Nanak, as he's dying, he knows he's dying, he says, when I die, put flowers on both sides of my body, burial on the left, cremation on the right, cover me with a shroud, and in the morning, whichever side has flowers that have bloomed, that's what you should do. And we'll let God decide. And what happens is they do this thing, they cover him up, they come back in the morning, they pull back the shroud, his body is gone, and all of the flowers have bloomed. So you can see this is sort of one of those mythological stories. It doesn't matter whether the flowers really bloomed or not. It matters whether you get the point that you don't pay attention to these rituals. It doesn't matter if he's buried or if he's cremated. All that matters is that there's this unity of thought, this unity of spirit between the groups. So, alright, Guru Nanak is the first of a series of 10 gurus. We are not going to focus on all 10 of these gurus, but we are going to focus on a couple of them. And the first of these gurus is the fifth guru, whose name is Arjan Dev. Arjan Dev introduces a couple of new aspects into Sikhism that are going to continue to shape the tradition as it moves on. I think I'll leave it there for this video, and I'll pick up with those changes when we come back. See you in video number 2.